Did I really say that?
Yeah.
Okay. We still got about
everyone. We still might have a few folks drop in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here, first of all. And if you haven't been here in a while, we have all this new equipment for recording and talking and listening and muting and unmuting, and I don't know any of it. I just know it's there, and it's a nice podium. The most important thing, again, thank you for being here. We have 2 more months of our programming for these Thursday sessions. Next month is supposed to, and then we're redoing it for next week. But next week we're supposed to be looking at multi-center studies, regulatory struggles, and different types of offices, research offices, and that would be our Thursdays of every month. As you know, this month was supposed to be consenting, and we changed it all around. To last week we did the changes in the ICH GCPs, and then this week we're going to talk about budgets and risk accounts. So I think we're going to stick with the multi-center topics for next month and regulatory, but watch for flyers, watch for information to see if we change the topic. We tend to do that, but we only do it because it's good for you all. So we only do it if it's important information, such as today. This is important information for you all to start to understand. The other thing, as I mentioned, this summer we're gonna redo. We plan out our schedule for our research seminars in June, so that we can get CMEs for the whole year. It's cheaper if we do it once a year and get it and submit it at one time. Because of last summer, our numbers dropped down significantly to only a few people. I think it was summer. I think it's too much for the summer to be doing it 3 times a month. So we may be cutting it back to once a month during the summer, and then pick it up in the fall with 2 or 3 sessions each month. We'll keep you posted on how that plays out. Finally, if you all, I think you may have evaluation forms, and please, if there are topics you haven't heard and you want more information on, we really depend on you to help direct, how we present, how we go forward with these programs. So, and one last thing, next week is our research orientation program. So if you know of any new staff, any new faculty who are very new to research, we'd love for them to join. It's free. It's 8 to 12 on Thursday. Again, if you're not familiar with it, we review the pre, during, and post, and roles and responsibilities of doing the study. And it's a good overview. It's a good way to introduce people to the language of research. We still want them to do this, and we still would like people to attend the research training program for coordinators and staff, and then the clinical investigator training program, which is more in depth. And that's going to take place. We did one in January. The next one will be in May. I think May 19th is what we're looking at right now. So if you have any new investigators, that one is specifically for investigators. The one next week is for everybody under the sun, because we just figure we'll get everybody in the same room who's new to research and review the concepts of research. And then, again, we look at the clinical investigator training program, which would be in May. It's comparable to the research training program. It's just much shorter. It's from 24 to 5 hours. So, but anyhow. Let me know if all of this is confusing and you want some more clarity on it, but please let us know if you have anybody who might be interested in any of those programs. So today we're going to talk about at-risk accounts and other budget challenges. Cindy Joyner is going to present on this. She was a very strong participant in our, they were monthly or every other week, it seemed, meetings that went on for almost 2 years, trying to figure out a way how to design a program, or how to design, standards for building clinical trial budgets. It hasn't really gone anywhere, but we think we're moving close now to getting the at-risk accounts built. So this is really just a presentation on I'll let Cindy tell us, but on how to do it and what it looks like. And we're welcome. She welcomes any of your questions.
So it's really informal. Stop me if you have questions. You all know who I am. I think I've met most everybody in here. But so we wanted to talk about these at-risk accounts and just some other budget challenges, because at-risk accounts doesn't fill up a whole hour. So probably could, but it would be very interesting. If I can get it to work.
Maybe the computer. No. So Jean left us. I'll find Jean. We need to talk.
So we everybody, I don't know, is anybody familiar with at-risk accounts, just in their general use? So historically, at-risk accounts have been used on campus as for federally funded projects or maybe industry-sponsored that's investigator-initiated. So it's mostly been grants, that type of thing. When we started in this work group back when Carolyn Whitmire was in her position, we were meeting regularly and we were talking about the challenges with clinical trials. And one of the things that kept coming up is when you start a clinical trial, and we're talking industry-funded clinical trials, there is a ton of work and effort that goes into everything that you do before you even have an executed contract. And so our concern was we're doing all this work, but you don't ever have a place to source that effort. You struggle with where you put your IRB fees, if you have to order supplies for studies. You know, you're constantly probably putting them in the improper places.
Yeah, let's do that.
Here, thanks. So what we talked about was creating these at-risk accounts or allowing the at-risk accounts to be used for industry-funded projects. And so we identified the need when we were in these work groups, and we started this pilot project in 2015. And the pilot only includes a few areas on campus. So we picked the ones that had maybe the higher volume and those that had a real interest in trying this out to see how it works. So the whole rationale behind it was, like I had said, we do all this extra work before you have an executed contract, and where are you going to put that salary? Where are you going to put those supplies or those IRB fees? Those types of things. And so they created this criteria for the at-risk accounts, the industry ones. You had to be in the pilot project, which I think there's 5 areas. In order to be considered for it, your project had to have a sponsored written protocol, meaning, you know, it was something along the lines of Pfizer or maybe Merck or whatever your industry is, and they provided you with this protocol. And it also had to qualify for the clinical trial F&A rate at the time. So I had to qualify for that 26% ID. We worked with Grants Accounting, and they were very aware that when you have these types of accounts, they're at risk, and so you're going to run it into a deficit. You know, you're sourcing things to that account before you even have the contract executed, before you have that first startup money in or that first payment. So since you're running it into a deficit, we had to make sure that everybody was aware. Make sure you know what you're putting there, make sure it needs to be there, and make sure you're aware of what the costs are. Because if for some reason that contract is not executed or that study is pulled, you are, the investigator, responsible for covering that deficit in the account. And that can make a lot of investigators nervous. It made our investigators in cardiology nervous at first. And so we really had to work to explain why we were putting expenses there, what those expenses were, and making sure the investigator was aware that every month, every time, you know, we would talk to them about what that account balance was. So there are some responsibilities on the PI. You can use this account for startup expenses. So like I said, IRB fees, pharmacy fees, radiology startup fees, any type of expense that's associated with the study activation project or process. In our area, we started IRB fees at first. And just if you're using IRB fees with this type of account, you need to include the indirect cost rate on that IRB fee in order to pay it from this account. For us, it made it really nice. So we weren't putting those IRB fees in an operating account or a residual account. All those fees went to the study at-risk account, which makes it much easier to track. And also allowed us a way to add salary to those accounts in a proper place for the work that the coordinator, manager, administration was doing on the trial. For us, we waited until we were really close to site initiation. So then we would go in and we would start to add what that salary was for the coordinator, the manager, regulatory person, and the work that they've done up to that point. You can add it sooner. For us, in our mind, using kind of site initiation or scheduling that site initiation or getting close to it, just added a milestone for us that made it easier to track. Grants Accounting, when these accounts are created, they evaluate the expenses that are posted to the accounts. They make sure those expenses are within the project period. your project period for these types of accounts, it would start when either you had an executed CDA or when you would let the office know that that's when you received your study documents. So we like to use when we received our study documents, when you get your contract, regulatory documents, those types of things. Because for us in our area, we could have a CDA executed, but it could be 6-8 months before we get study documents. So we like to use the study document receipt date. Right now, these accounts are established through the Office of Industry Engagement. And so Franny Horn sets those accounts up, and we work with Franny, but that's just for the pilot phase. Then once you have your executed contract, Grants Accounting works with OSP to change that at-risk account to an active account. So then you start with a true start date of the award, and it's no longer an at-risk. For us, right now it is in pilot phase. There is hope that it's going to include other areas and roll out across campus, but we need to make sure that process is done slowly, that everybody is educated on what that entails, because you do run these accounts in a deficit, so you need to make sure that you're fully aware of how to use the accounts. And so if somebody is interested in doing the pilot project, you can contact Franny. She can work with administration to see if it's possible to add you to the project. We've recently added 2 new sites, and it's actually an investigator that wanted to be part of the project. We've enjoyed it in cardiology. It's been helpful. I'd say more so for the IRB fees and then sourcing the salary, but you just have to make sure that you know what is hitting that account, because you are responsible if that account or that study isn't activated. But it's a nice way if you think about where we're going with effort reporting and the financial standards over the next year or so. It allows you to account for work that research staff and investigators are doing on the project, where in the past we might have just either not accounted for it at all or put it in different places that actually wasn't related to the study account. Any questions about the at-risk accounts? So the other part of this kind of leads into challenges that we have in budgeting, and this really is just kind of tips for when you're looking at budgeting and things that we typically run into, and hopefully maybe offer some advice on how to handle some of these things. So we've noticed in our area there's about 6 big challenges. There's a ton of challenges, but 6 that I put on here. Startup costs always seem to be an issue, how you get those. The indirect costs, justification for your cost, standard costs and fees, operating costs, and then tracking expenditures and invoices. So for us, startup costs, this is where that at-risk account can be very helpful. You have a great deal of effort that you put into getting the study up and running. And a lot of times, I think we just figure it's part of it, and we never account for that time spent. But it's a good idea if you use some type of tracking tool to keep up with the amount of time that you're spending on getting a study up and running. You could use something like software system, a spreadsheet, a type of allocation report, or even a simple notebook and calendar. If it's just you in your area, or if it's 20 people in your area, having some type of system to capture the amount of time that you're spending getting a study up and running is important. So you are able in the future to budget that in and ask for those costs from a sponsor, but also so once you have an active account, you can source that effort to the account so it's in the appropriate place. In our area, we typically look at like an Excel spreadsheet, and we use allocation reports for our coordinators. So our coordinators really track how much time they're spending on a study, and then we're able to account for that when the account is active. The indirect costs, we've noticed more and more sponsors are looking at kind of a bottom line for patient payments or in your budget. Instead of negotiating for cost per patient and then adding your indirects on top of it, we've had more sponsors that they have one number, and that's what your indirects come out of. So you need to make sure that you truly know what indirect cost rate applies to your study. Right now, it can be the 26%, 36%, or 47%. You don't want to agree to a budget thinking you're going to hit that 26 F&A rate, and then it gets over to OSP, and for some reason there's some language in the contract that it might actually qualify for the 36%. If you're working with a sponsor that's not going to change your bottom line, you just lost 10% in your budget. So take the time up front, and many of you probably already know this, but take the time up front, read that contract, talk to your OSP officer, and make sure you know what the indirect cost rate is going to be for your study. So you can budget accordingly and make sure that you get the money that you need. And then OSP also has a new website. Those emails came out today. They've got some great tools on there, but if you need justification for your indirect cost rate, we have so many sponsors that ask for that. You can refer them to the website, or you can refer them to a document on the website that shares that information. Justification seems to become more and more of an issue, and we understand why, but when we were doing budgets 10, 15 years ago, sponsors would usually take what you told them. If you said your indirect was 26%, or you said, you know, it costs us $5,000 to do a CT, or it costs us $5,000 to get the study up and running, that's our startup cost, sponsors were more inclined to say, okay. Well, now many more of them want some type of written justification or documentation. And so it's good practice to spend some time up front and kind of create that document for yourself or your group, so that when they're asking for those justifications, you just cut and paste what you need into those documents, that email, or put it on a memo, or have your investigator sign it. So in our area, we've created a lot of tools like that, and I've brought some with me if you want to look at them. I've done some screenshots, but you want to have that common language, so you're not always redoing it, you're not having to retype it all the time, or trying to figure out what you sent the last sponsor, that it's handy. And then you want to also consider maybe creating some budget guidelines. This is something that we did recently. It came out of the work group that we were in, and then we kind of followed suit with what Cancer Center had done for a number of years. And so in that, we really explain what our standard fees are, what our startup costs entail, what IRB review entails, you know, what those different areas require. We also have a document that describes our area. It describes our research staff, our investigators, our experience, our facilities, and it talks about everything that we do, the types of studies that we do, how many we've done. And so if you have a sponsor that needs that information, or a lot of times we give it to them up front. We give them an information sheet at their initial site or pre-site visit. We send them information when we're working on the budget, and it helps provide, actually makes our life a little bit easier because we're not having to constantly reiterate what we're doing. And then you want to make sure you update that language frequently. This is an example of kind of just a little summary. It's a 2-page document that we hand out at our pre-site visits. It's really tiny, but I have it if you want to see it. I'm happy to send it to you. It just describes our research unit. It gives an overview of our research interests. It describes our experience in our facilities. It talks about our hospital, Kirkland Clinic, the number of beds we have, that kind of stuff. And then it talks about our IRB and our office's sponsored programs. And then on the second page, we have all of our investigators and the areas that we do research in, and has all of our contact information. So it's really helpful to hand out at pre-site visits, but also when you're doing budgets and they're asking information or justification for why you need certain things, a lot of times you can cut and paste from this. This is another document that we have. This is kind of our standards, our budget guidelines that we use, and it's, how many pages is it now, Megan? It's like 10. Yeah, so we keep updating it, and it takes some time in the beginning to create it, but the amount of time that you save on the back end is very, very useful because you can cut and paste, or you can send them the whole document. But this outlines, this is just an example of what we provide as justification for why we're asking for startup fees and what that includes. And it details everything out. So I would try to be as specific as possible. And then along with that, we look at standard costs. And so we have standard costs that we try to negotiate. And I'm not talking about maybe patient care expenses as much as I'm talking about long-term storage, IRB fees, startup fees, monitor charges, audit fees, SAE reporting, that kind of stuff. So it's all stuff that you do a lot of work for and we don't always ask for money for. But you want to know what it costs to operate your area, and you want to know what some of your common fees are so that you can cut and paste. But many of us, I think, we go through on a daily basis and we do all these things in our office and we really don't know what it's costing. So if it's just one or two of you, it might not be as important, but it really should be important. And if you have a group, you really should know what it costs. So what does it cost for your phones, your computers, supplies, networks, pagers, lab coats? All these things have a fee associated with them that goes into conducting the research. And so we look on an annual basis at what it costs us to run our research area. And then we charge that back to the studies. We also build it in as line items to the budgets when we do internal budgets. And we've started adding it to sponsor budgets as an invoice item. So we charge them an annual fee for us to run that study. And we've had a good feedback on that. We haven't had it, not approved. Most of them have been pretty good about it. Some of them question it. They want to know what the justification is, and that's where you can use those documents that you have to pull in and justify why you're asking for that. And if we can clearly outline to our investigators in our division what it costs to run the unit every year, that's helpful as well. So you want to make sure that you take some time and put together what those standard costs are for you. This is an example of one of the pages, and it's that 12-page document that we have where it outlines what your study fees are and then what the cost is. Now, this is what we want. It doesn't mean we always get it. And if a sponsor offers more, we're not going to turn it down. But, it gives you a starting place and helps you keep it all organized and keeps you on track so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. You can have a simple place that you go to and get all the information that you need. And then I had talked about operating costs. And again, know what it costs to run your unit. It can take a little bit of time to pull all the information together, but it's important. It has helped us in the division get more support. If we needed a new copier or if we needed new staff or we needed computers, these types of things, we know what it costs us every year, and then we can say, well, it costs us this. We need 3 laptops. It's not going to make that much of a difference, but this is what the overall cost would be. So, and you want to think about all the things that goes into running your research unit. Tracking is huge. This is something I don't think we do a very good job at typically, because if you are a small shop, you've got everything else to do. If you're a larger shop, you might have a lot of studies, making it difficult. Sponsors typically pay on a quarterly basis, or they pay when data is entered. So a lot of times in clinical trials, you're going to run in a deficit, and then you're going to get a chunk of money, and you're going to be in the black for a couple weeks, and then you're going to be in a deficit again. So you need to find a system that works for you for tracking. Oracle is not a good tracking tool or a good, it's not like your checkbook. It doesn't give you a good picture of what your accounts look like when you're looking at clinical trials. So you have to find a way to estimate, if you can, a very good estimate of what money you have coming in patient payments or invoices. The invoices are a little bit easier. Maybe create a spreadsheet, use a software system, something that will help you track the invoices that you've sent out and when the invoices come back in. And then for patient payments, work with the coordinators. Maybe if you use SiteMinder or Encore, you're going to have a better idea of what patient payments are coming in. Where we fall short a lot of times is there are several things on your invoiced or invoiceable items on your budget that the sponsor isn't going to say, hey, you submitted 20 SAEs, and so we're going to go ahead and give you that 150 per SAE. It's up to you to generate the invoices and track that. And so you have to find a system that works in your group for making sure you get that. The other thing that you want to think about is you really should reconcile those accounts monthly. If you're a small group, it's very challenging to do that. Maybe you do it quarterly, but reconcile your accounts. And then it's good practice to try and do a financial audit on those. We've done several financial audits, and we always find money that we've left on the table. The sponsor's not going to come back to you and say, oh, hey, we didn't pay you that $5,000, 3 years ago. But if you're doing your audits and you're reconciling your accounts, you can find the money that's owed, and you can go back to the sponsor and ask for it. So the tracking, I think, is a lot of times the last thing on our mind. If you're taking care of patients, you're doing data, and a lot of people assume that the money will come in. Patient payments might, but all that extra stuff you might be leaving on the table. So you really need to find some type of system. Those were the challenges that we most commonly have in our area. So what Penny and I talked about was if anybody wanted to talk about challenges that they had or have any questions, if there's something that you're currently struggling with that maybe we or the group can help address or provide some insight on.
Cindy, what you mentioned that 36%. Also, we've not encountered that in any of our studies. What's kind of some examples of what?
Typically, like financial audit language in the contract. So if they're financial audit language, and is there something else?
Observational studies.
Observational studies.
And if children's has moved toward many of their studies, it becomes 36%. We're seeing more and more because it's kind of off-site, I think. It's out of the hospital. But I'm not, again,
if it's
a gray
off-site,
area to me why they make the decision to.
But I think a lot of times, most of our studies in our area, we were used to the 26%. And we were negotiating budgets based on 26%, and we'd get it over to OSP, and then they'd say, oh, hey, did you know this one is 36%? And for us, the common issue was legal language. So if the sponsor wanted financial audit language in there, UAB considers it under the 36%. Because what that means is if a sponsor comes in and they want access to our financial records, then grants accounting has to get involved. And so that's why the indirect is higher.
Because what's happening is there, we've seen this in some protocols that the companies are not only studying the drug, but they want to look at the cost benefit of the drug. And then I think, is that one of the reasons, I think that's what pushes it to 36%, because then we have to include more people in the implementation of the whole study, because somebody's going to have to go pull those records, send them to the pharmaceutical company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So,
yeah. So is OSP able to, once you send them the contract and the protocol, that they're able to make that determination at that time?
Yeah.
What's called? Okay.
they look like the contract.
Yeah, and I mean, really, if it happens to you like once or twice, you really learn to find it.
It'll happen once.
Once.
Only because you develop your whole budget and then suddenly you got to go back. It goes up.
And we have a lot of observation. We've had multiple observation studies, and so the sponsors might assume it's the 26%, especially if they've gone out and looked at the website where they've done studies with us before that were not observational. And so we say, well, it's a 36% indirect. Say, well, the per patient amount's still the same. I'm like, no, because we're losing 10%. It's not going to change how much it costs us to do the study. You know, we still need that 36% on top.
Are they definitions of those up on the OSP website as far as the 36 versus 26 and how they make those? Not really.
The 26 is out there, and there's a memo.
Yeah, I've seen that from Marcos. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the 36%, I don't think there's an exact memo out there.
Yeah.
We've just learned to really work with our officer.
Cindy, you're mentioning the 26%. When are we going to the 30%? Anybody know? I've heard July. Okay.
Yeah, my understanding is July.
There was an email early on that says May, I think, and then I think they moved it to later. So if anybody saw that, so then the lowest will be 30% as opposed to 26%.
My understanding is 30% in July, but they were still working out maybe how to grandfather people in and giving people enough time.
For the old protocols, that those wouldn't change. That'd be good.
And that's what we've just noticed more investigators doing that. This is the max that we can do per patient. And that doesn't, whatever our IDC is not included in that. So then you could end up losing money and the sponsor's just going to pay you the same amount. So you have to make sure you do your internal budget properly. Any other issues, questions, challenges you guys are having? Alrighty.
So Cindy, how many people do we know that are doing the at-risk accounts? Do you know?
I think there's 5 groups. Is that right, Brittany? So it's cardiology, infectious disease,
17.
yeah, neurology, nephrology,
Transplant, and Cancer Center, the groups that are supported by their city.
Has anybody reported any specific challenges to that? Is it working? I'm just curious, who would we not know?
We've enjoyed it. In terms of, it kind of is what it is. It's an account that you should be posting to. The challenges in getting them set up are that the dates on the extramural checklist need to be completed. So if you have a CDA, put the CDA number on there. Or you can also use the start date as when you received your documents, your study documents.
I think the biggest challenge is going to be educating people on why you should use it and what it means. Because we've never had to do that before. You could kind of hide the money or move it around, or because investigators that have been here for a while don't want to lose the money, so maybe the effort isn't accounted for, or it's sourced to another account, which isn't right either, but it's the way it's always been done. So making sure the education part of it is critical. Anything else? That was quick.
Thank you all. Please look at your evaluation forms and make comments as to what you all need. Really helpful. Other than more time. We can only get 5. We can't give you more time or more money. Other things that you might need.
Now, if anybody wanted to see kind of our little sample documents for reference,
Yeah.